In this video, we will be exporting our Azure resources into our Terraform configuration files. Basically, we are importing the state of our resources into our state file. This is my resource group, and these are the resources. I've got an app service plan and a website, which is a web app. I will be importing these into my Terraform state file. There is this tool called aztfexport, which we will be using. This is a tool from Microsoft and it looks very promising. It used to be called AZT-Fi and now they have rebranded it as AZTF Export. So we are going to check out the tool and first create our resources which I've already created. You can create that by CLI or partial or just the portal and then import those into your Terraform configuration files. This is the documentation for AZTF export. The URL is github.com/azure/aztf export. First, we will be down installing it. So if you see in March 7, 2023, they changed the name from AZT-Fi to AZTF export. So we will be first downloading the binary and installing it. Once installed, we will quickly check whether it has been successfully installed. I'll type AZTF export. As you can see, the version is 0.11. So we have got a version of AZTF export installed successfully, and the version is 0.11.0. That's the latest version. Before this, it was used to be called AZT-Fi. That's a version. All is well. So now we will be trying to go through the documentation and see how we will actually import the resources that we have manually created in our Azure subscription into the state files and how actually this particular tool writes the configurations for you. I'll open my Visual Studio Code and an open folder. Let me cancel this. This is some history from my previous setup. Let me clean that. This is a empty folder. This is where we will be importing our configurations. Let me first log in. That is my subscription and we have successfully logged in. All is well. That's my subscription details. Let's go back to the documentation. This is the official documentation from the Azure, from Microsoft. So this is kind of a tutorial where you can just play around. In our case, we have already got some resources available in a resource group. So this is the command that we need to run. AZTF export, the resource group and the resource group name. So we'll be going through the entire process. Let's head back to. So we'll do AZTF export, the resource group and the resource group name. For us, this is our resource group, fitnessgeek-rg. Have owner permissions, so it should be fine. Once I run this, you can see it has already started creating some files, provider.tf, terraform.tf, and a folder called .terraform. I think that's where the binaries are stored. You can see the Terraform lock. It is currently initializing. Let's see how long it takes. I'll try to fast forward this from here. All right, so we have got some progress. If you see, it tells you there are 12 items that it will be importing. The actual resource IDs. So that's my subscription. Then, yeah, that's subscription ID, the resource group, and that's okay. The second is my provider web. That's my web app, the Azure App Service. That's the website. So that's the app service plan. Okay, looks all right. It is trying to import the deployments as well, which I don't think we need. And now these are the steps that you have to do. To import, you need to type W. To delete, skip. So it gives you all the options that's available. I'll just type W and it will start importing. So currently it's importing the subscription, sorry, not subscription, but the resource group. That's the resource ID, the subscription and the subscription ID, the resource group and the resource group name. The idea here is to check how it writes our configuration, how good it is. I'm sure we will need to do a lot of changes, but at least you will have the skeleton of your entire resources in a state file, and then you can, make the necessary changes that you need. It's going smooth so far, 83% completed, generating Terraform configurations. So it should create a main.tf. Yep, it has created. So now you see Terraform state and the config are generated at this location, which is fine. And that looks good. This is your Terraform provider information, the version 3.46. I think that's the latest one. That's fine. About the Terraform TF state. That's the file we need. And this is your mapping.json that the CLI, this tool creates. I think this is where it stores all the resource IDs, which is also good. We'll look into the documentation in a moment after just going through the files that we have. We have skipped the deployments. That's perfect. This is our provider information, Azure RM. This is your Terraform block for the required providers, the source for the Azure RM and the version. This is the state file. So this is where all our resources have been imported. It has, the it has created the identifiers as res-0 and res-1. So it's like resource 0, resource 1, resource 2. That's, I think, the naming convention for this particular tool. That's my resource. Yeah, I can see the resource group. I can see my service, the resource app service plan, and the Azure RM service plan Terraform. This is the another resource, which is your app service plan, which is exactly what we would write if we want to create an app service plan. So this works perfectly fine. Then it creates the very exactly how that's the location where we have our resources, the OS type, the SKU name, and that's very nice. It also creates a depends on, which is fantastic. So it's like depends on the kind of a relationship with other resources. That's exactly what we would right if we create the resources ourselves. For example, if you're creating an app service plan which has to sit in a resource group, if the resource group has not been created, you will not be able to create the app service plan. In that case, you will need a relationship or a flow. So you will make sure that the resource group gets created first and then the app service plan. This is the Linux web app resource that's imported successfully. Perfectly fine. This is the custom. Yeah, this was not required. I don't think we have done any custom binding there. So that is okay. Let's run Terraform in it. Perfectly fine. Azure RM version 3.46.0. It's the latest one. Let's run a Terraform plan, and it should say no changes in the infrastructure. So we don't have anything new that will be created or anything that will need to be dropped. So if that is the case, we can agree that it has successfully imported all the resources from the resource group. The Terraform plan is in progress. Let's see what it says. The best case scenario or the expectations from this tool would be to tell us no changes required. Perfect. That's what we wanted. No changes. Your infrastructure matches the configuration. So what it did was it compared our existing infrastructure in Azure with our state file, and it says no changes are required. This is exactly what we wanted. This means uh, this tool, aztf export, has imported all the resources, the dependencies, or everything from our resource group into our state file, into our local configuration files. We have got all the configurations. I've just removed the the service plan ID, the hard coded, the entire full the resource ID. Instead, I'm just importing as the resource Azure RM service plan, the resource and the ID. So that's the change I made, and that means, I mean, there would be no changes. It would just be fine. And if we run a Terraform plan, it should just tell us that no changes again. So it is doing a bit of hard coding in terms of the resource IDs. That's definitely something we can work on, and we can just use our reference to the particular resource and then the properties of the attributes of that particular resource. So that's something that we will need to change. We will do it as a good practice. I just quickly did that and it should tell me that no changes. That's exactly what we wanted. So everything looks good so far, and I'm very impressed, because importing resources from existing resources into your Terraform can be really messy and it's very painful. You can miss something and then you have to keep iterating through properties. And so first you need to create the skeleton of the entire resource, and then you import it, and then you change the properties. So it's a bit of a work that you need to do. Let's look at the usage documentation from GitHub. So for exporting a single resource, this is your command, the aztf export, the resource and the resource ID. It exports a single resource by its Azure control plane ID. That's fine. That's how you will be using it. And then exporting a resource group, which is what we did right now. So the aztf export resource group and the resource group name. That's exactly what we did. And that ran fine. This is what we have imported. Let's add a storage account quickly from the portal, because when you are in a small organization and you have to have a fast development process. You cannot just wait to write the code and go through the entire process. Sometimes you need to create resources manually from CLI or from partial or just from the portal, and then you will have to import it. And this solution looks really good. Only problem I think is because it's very Azure focused. It's a tool specific for Azure resources. But for me, it like so far so good. Works really great with what it has been made for. Serves our purpose. Okay, so now we will be exporting this single resource, the storage account that we have created, and see what it does. Like, because we already have got a main.tf that it created, and if I try to import again, what it does, will it just append to that, or will it create a new configuration file? So we'll have to check that. So to test that, I have created a storage account. I will need this storage account's resource ID, which will be in the properties of the storage account. Let me go ahead and see the endpoints, the settings and the endpoints. This is our storage account resource ID. I'll copy that. And if you see the command, it's aztf export resource and the resource ID. We will be doing that in our existing folder where we have already imported the resource group, and see what options it prompts, or what's going to happen. Will it directly create it, or it will create more files? So this is the okay, these are the options available. Press Y to overwrite the existing directory with new files. Press N to append new files and add to the existing state instead. Okay, so we will press N because we want to just add this particular resource to our existing all the configurations that we have. We just want to add the storage account to the existing state. That's exactly what we want. So we will be pressing N and enter. So it's initializing again. You can see it is trying to tell us that this particular resource, which is a storage account, will be imported, which is exactly what we want. We will press W and it should start doing its job. Okay, so it has successfully completed the import. The Terraform state and the configuration are generated. That's the location. Press any key to quit. Perfectly fine. And now if you see on the left side, the Explorer, we have got a new file called main.aztfexport.tf. Earlier, when we imported the entire resource group, we got the main.tf. So I think this is one of the naming convention it uses when it's trying to append. It creates a file with aztf export as a suffix probably. We will read, we'll try to read that from the documentation and what it says. All right, so we have exited that aztf export, and now let's go ahead and check our configuration files. The new file is the main.aztfexport.tf. The main.tf was generated in the previous import that we ran. The name is aztf export, but actually we are running from our local system, so it's mostly importing. But yeah, it does the job. So yeah, and if this is the file main.aztfexport.tf, where we have our Azure storage account, and if you see the Identifier is actually res hyphen zero, which is, I think, whenever you run the first resource is always named as res zero. We already have one resource with same identifier, but it was a resource group in main.tf. The count account type and everything is fine, the name and everything else. Now, if you check the documentation, let's scroll down a bit. Okay, interacting versus non-interactive. You can go ahead and read this. I'm more concerned about what happens when you append. So this is the backend local versus remote. By default, AZTF export checks the output directory whether it is empty. It is not if it is not empty, the user can specify either override to clean up the directory or append. We chose append. In append mode, the file generated by AZTF export be named differently than normal, where each file will have .aztf export suffix. Okay, that's exactly what we had, main.aztf export.tf. So when you do it multiple times, it will keep appending aztf export. That's what it says. To avoid potential file name conflicts, blah 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 blah. That's fine. On top of this, AZTF exports support importing these resources to state local or remote. That's good. To change the backend configurations, this is what we'll have to do. We will do the remote uh, changes, the backend remote changes later in our another video. For now, we are good. And so this AZTF export leverages AZTFT to identify the Terraform resource types. Then it runs the Terraform import. So underneath it is running the same Terraform import after identifying the resource IDs. So that's exactly what you would be doing without this particular tool. So the limitation causing AZTF export can hardly generate reproducible Terraform configuration. So you'll have to do a lot of changes yourself, for better coding standards. But yeah, it works. It basically the conclusion from this video would be that it works and it imports the resources exactly how you would want it to, and then you can make the changes. You can make the code more readable, more user friendly, and all those changes. So I'm pretty happy with this particular resource, particular tool, and I think I would recommend it if you have a lot of resources to import from Azure and you would like to use a tool. This would be something I would definitely recommend. Thanks for watching, and I think goodbye for today. I'll catch you up in our next video. Till then, take care and keep supporting. Cheers. Bye bye.